Talks with
Christian Gonzalez
and today from Tatooine, and today we'll be talking about Christianity and pop culture. So I'm here with my good friend Christian Gonzalez, who is an Ancient Faith radio podcaster and blogger on another blog, I think.
Correct.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
But for Ancient Faith, you're doing The Trench.
Yep.
Very, very popular show. Almost as popular as Be the Bee.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can only aim so high. In our lives,
I know. You're not as good looking as Stephen.
I'm really not. Sadly.
But you've also been a guest on Be the Bee as well.
I have.
What else do you do for AFR?
Steve and I actually team up together to do Pop Culture Coffee Hour, which is just an audio podcast that we have.
Yeah.
Be the Bee and The Trench are both.
Where you guys just talk about basically what we're talking about today.
Yeah. Yep.
Like
exactly.
Pop culture.
Pop culture.
All right. Yeah. So I'm not trying to copy them, but really today on Fr.TEDTalks we did get a question actually through our Gmail account, and the question, I'm just going to read it, is this. It says, in such a world of misleading philosophies and brainwashing media, well, this person's kind of really mean and angry, should the Orthodox Church be participating in media, especially online media, when this is the tool of the enemy? Should we not be offering an alternative to social media instead of jumping on the bandwagon like everyone else? That's the question, Christian. So, yeah.
I think one of the problems that we can run into is thinking that certain things are tools of the enemy. I'm not sure that you could even necessarily look at, it's kind of like looking at the telephone in some ways and thinking, is the telephone a tool of the enemy, and should we as Orthodox Christians not have used the telephone when Alexander Graham Bell invented it? I don't know that that's maybe the right question, but rather the way in which we engage pop culture, the way that we engage social media, maybe is the bigger question that we have to deal with. And I think, as to a certain extent, Orthodox Christians were called to be ethnographers, maybe for lack of a better word, people who chart culture, people who are able to look at it and interpret it with a new light, to look for Jesus Christ in dark places. As Christians, we confess that Jesus Christ is the fullness of what it is to be God, the fullness of what it is to be human, and that as we look at Christ crucified, we see God. I don't know that simply being afraid of things that appear to be dark, or simply things that don't seem to have God in them, are necessarily that necessarily means that we should think of them as tools of the enemy. By virtue of the fact that Christ ascended the cross, by virtue of the fact that Christ descended into hell, defeated darkness was transformed into a place of his presence. And while we might be able to look at some of these brainwashing philosophies or the misleading media that we might look at, I think it's still possible for us to bravely enter that world as Christians and to look for where God might be present, what God might be calling us to. Even if we see, sort of apophatically what God is not, that we can say God is not that, and that must in some ways point us toward the light if we know that the darkness is not him. But I think more than anything, what this call might be for Orthodox Christians might not necessarily be to go watch every artifact in pop culture that you possibly can, but to be good creators of culture. As people who are made in the image of a creative God, we're called to be creative. We're called to do things, to intend the world, to make matter do stuff. And I think that this is a great opportunity and a great location for us to spread the gospel, to walk bravely into the world and to confess that Christ is risen, even in places that seem to be filled with darkness, even in places that seem to be filled with hatred, and to not be afraid, of what other people might say to us or what they might be saying to each other, but rather to go and be people. If you're in a pitch black room and you have a little bit of light, that light is going to shine really brightly. And I think that if we take even just a little bit of light into what we may perceive as a really dark world, socially or in social media or in pop culture, then that light is going to shine really brightly. But we can't do that if we're afraid. We can't enter the darkness if we're afraid of the dark. And so I think that is where we are called.
You mentioned fear, and fear is, I think, probably the biggest obstacle that we have. We're a few days away from the supposed Great Council, the Great and Holy Council, right? And we're seeing all this controversy, right? We're seeing all these churches pulling out last minute, not wanting to go. I think it's fear, right? And even though we're talking about pop culture today, and we're talking about whether we should be engaging and whether we should even be online, because this viewer asked specifically not just whether we should be engaging with pop culture, but should we even be online? Should we be doing what we're doing right now, right? That's the question. And obviously we think we should, because this is what we do. And you made a really good point about the idea of, the telephone. Or even the printing press. Where would the church be without the printing press? It's like the latest technology, right? And I think fear makes us go back when we should go forward. And I think also the fear of the unknown, the fear of the other, and usually the fear of the other comes from the idea of the fear within ourselves, of what we don't know about ourselves, or our insecurities about our faith. Because I find that most people who are well-rounded Orthodox Christians, who are educated about their faith, they're also not afraid to dialogue with others. And I do find that people who are kind of, or have remained Christians on the surface, they've kind of attached themselves to, the external expressions of Christianity, sometimes idolizing them, because sometimes the church can become an idol. We are also the ones who are afraid of engaging with the other, or the evil ones, or, all those people on the outside who are using all these tools, right? We didn't invent them, somebody else did, therefore it's evil. Right, and we're going to get sucked in. Now, it's true that sometimes you do get sucked in. Sometimes we have to cultivate discernment, within ourselves, and what kind of movies, like you said, that we do watch, and things that we choose not to watch, or the type of music that we listen to, and the type of music that we don't listen to. But to put on blinders and to say, I'm not going to look at anything, right? I think is a little crazy. I remember I had a class with now Metropolitan Salas of Pittsburgh. Who back then was Bishop Salas, Chancellor of the Archdiocese, when I was at St. Vladimir's. And he taught me a class, along with Professor Peter Buteneff at St. Vlad's, about God and modern culture, pop culture. And basically we just watched movies with him and analyzed, and Metropolitan Salas was big on the idea that we are supposed to kind of cultivate in ourselves an Orthodox lens by which we view the world, and especially with pop culture. And then this is a bishop whose favorite movie is Pulp Fiction. Because he sees a redemption story in it. You show that to anybody else, they probably think it's not the best movie to watch, right? But he refuses to believe that there is no good in it, but rather there's actually a profound story there, even in the midst of that graphic violence and horrific parts of the story, right? So I don't know, that deeply influenced me. And I love what you guys do with Stephen, with the Pop Culture Coffee Hour, this idea of, engaging and really getting into it, and not being afraid or not shying away from discussing these kind of issues and trying to find Christ everywhere.
I think you bring up a really good point about fear, and in the scriptures, fear and love are kind of pitted against each other.
Yes.
And the Lord definitely calls us to love the world. The Father sends Jesus Christ into the world because he loves the world, to give himself to the world and for the world. And we can't do that. Right? We can't be like Jesus and love the world if we're too busy being afraid of the world.
Sure.
And so I think there is this call to just enter it, to be sent into the world, and to give ourselves to it, and to not be afraid, so that we can actually love it.
And every other metaphor that Christ uses, being the salt of the earth, being the leaven that leavens the lump, leaven has to actually be in the dough. You can't leaven it from far, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You can't sit there and point fingers and say, that's bad, that's horrible. Obviously, there's some things that, we can't participate in, right? There are points that we cannot go beyond, right? But at the same time, there are people in those places.
Yeah.
There are people producing media, even media that we would find objectionable, music that we find objectionable, movies, things like that. And those people are human beings. They're made in the image and likeness of Christ. And unless we engage with them as well, we can never witness to them. We can't just say, those are the evil people. They make the evil content, right? And we're not going to talk to them. Well, no, we got to talk to them as well. Yeah, I think.
I agree.
You do?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Totally.
I really appreciate you agreeing with me.
Yeah, on your show.
Of
all places to agree with you.
Well,
I chose here to do it.
I was hoping you would.
Yeah.
I was looking forward to it. I choose guests that make me look good. Well, thank you, Christian, for coming on, and helping out with this episode of Father Ted Talks, for helping us answer this question from one of our viewers.
Thank you very much.
And I hope that our viewers learned something from this. I hope we learned something. I know I learned from you, because
I know you did too.
You've been doing. Yeah, I did. Yeah. And so make sure you guys watch The Trench. Follow Christian on Ancient Faith Radio, and we'll hope to see you again soon. And God bless you, and may we have the courage to be able to proclaim Christ in the world, and not to be afraid to engage those people who may disagree with us, and even those people who may not see the light of Christ in their lives, in their everyday lives, and we can attempt to bring Christ to them as well.
Amen. Thank you, Father, for having me.
Thank you. Thank you too.